Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Marianne Mercer, and welcome to my Positive Life Answers podcast. I'm your podcast host and self-improvement expert, Dr. Marianne Mercer, and you can call me Dr. Mary, as many people do. In my Positive Life Answers podcast, again, my goal is to help you transform the quality of your life and help you create the life you desire. The goal of my podcast is to help you make improvements and changes in practical and easy ways. So let's create the best life ever. And I am so excited today. I have a special guest, Leslie Maloney, and I want to tell you a little bit about her. Leslie is a proud wife, a book author, teacher, and a podcast host. Leslie built successful life enrichment and educational programs at high school, colleges, and community levels for well over 30 years. She's authored 3 books, and I love these titles. I love the titles of her books. Things to Remember as You Fly from the Nest. Now, the second one being a mermaid fanatic, Mermaid Meg and the Magic Lagoon. I need to read that. Danny's Adventures with the Ocean Lifeguards. I love these titles, and these are all available on Amazon. And Leslie recently developed a podcast, and it explores midlife and beyond after age 50. And she's helping people explore the possibilities, break through labels and blocks that come up during that time in your life, and kind of revamping yourself. So we'll talk about this and more today as we welcome Leslie to Positive Life Answers. So I am so excited you're here today.
Thanks. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I gave the listeners kind of an overview of your background. Tell us a little bit more about your background and what you've done that I may have missed.
Well, you really hit the highlights there. I've been in education really career-wise for my whole life, really. I still teach a couple of online classes for our local state college just to keep my hand in it. It's very flexible and allows me to do a lot of different things. So I don't feel like it's really a job. It's a very kind of side thing for me. But I left the classroom in 2013 as far as teaching high school. And I've been at the state college for about 10 years. I was doing that kind of on the side while I was still full time. And I've taught, different community classes, women in transition type things. I'm a yoga teacher. So just really kind of a teacher, still do that. Just really a teacher at heart, and in one form or another, I guess you'd say. And I got into writing back probably, my first book was Things to Remember as You Fly from the Nest.
Yes.
And I probably wrote that when I left the classroom. So I had some time, and about 2014, 2015. It's just like it sounds. I working with teenagers, and mostly those juniors and seniors, you're continually having those conversations about flying from the nest and things to remember, and just sort of life lessons, life advice kind of conversations. And so I began to write them down, and I thought, I ought to turn this into a book because there's just a lot of good stuff here.
Absolutely.
Kind of had that intention probably for 5 years or so. Kind of carried my little notebook around, and we just, every now and then write things down. And it was really good exercise for me too. And my own kids were going through high school and, college. They were also leaving the nest. And so I was having those conversations with them, their friends, nieces and nephews. So it was just super timely. And, what would I say? What would I say to somebody at that time of their life about to remember as they move forward? So it's it's mind, body, spirit kind of stuff.
I like that. I have nephews that are leaving the nest this summer. So I am going to definitely look into that and ask more questions as we go along. Because, as an involved aunt in their lives, I feel like the nest is emptying also in my role as a supportive aunt who they talk to outside of their parents. Is a lot of changes coming up. So I love that. Yeah. It's a great resource for everyone.
And it's an evolving conversation. I think it's an evolving conversation for everybody. And,
yes.
What I said then, I would add to now, just based on my life experience 10 or so years later, more things to share.
That's wonderful. What a creative way to as a teacher, then transitioned to book author. And you've came up with really creative titles as well. Now, during this time where you're shifting from being a teacher, and you still do that, but now as an author and then going into podcasting, what was the process of your thinking and your motivation to start Meaning in Moxie Over 50?
Well, that had been I had been thinking about podcasting for a couple of years. And I had a few conversations with my husband about, just like we'd be coming from a social gathering or something and had just had a really great conversation with somebody. And I would say to him, we just know a lot of cool people. There's so many cool people out there. I would love to just get some of these conversations recorded. And so it kind of started out like that, and I didn't really know how it was going to come together. I knew that it had energy around it. Okay. And so I always pay attention to those types of things when I can feel the spark in myself when I think about it. And then it just, in those couple of years, it just kept percolating. Occasionally it would pop up and there'd still be energy. And it was sort of when something, for me, how my process works is when something isn't clear, I just sort of let it percolate and I trust that it will reveal itself. And because I've had it happen many times. So, I just sort of, let that percolate. And I was actually driving back home last summer. I was leaving Montana. Our daughter lives in Montana. I had driven out there. My husband had met me because he has more work constraints than I do in terms of having to be physically there. So I kind of took a cross-country adventure out there. I came across a podcasting class just kind of by accident. Somebody I was listening to was on a podcast and mentioned this class, and it just immediately, sparked. And I said, "Oh, that's what I need to do. I need to get involved in that class." I really connected with her and what she was saying about sharing your story and being authentic and not worrying, letting go of perfection and just putting things out there and sharing your voice. And which I think is a challenge sometimes for people, especially for women. And working through a lot of that as I've gotten older, I'm like, yeah, I need to do this. So, and if not now, when? So I just jumped into the course, and it was a really good course, and it just kind of pointed me in the right direction. And I launched Meaning in Moxie After 50 in January of this year, 2024.
What gravitated you toward that subject personally?
Good question. Just because I am in that phase of my own life, and I'm involved in conversations about life after 50 and what it holds for people. And I get frustrated sometimes with people who are buying into ageist labels and things like that and allowing themselves to be defined by that. And so I wanted to be part of the conversation to give people like, hey, there's lots of things you can be doing, and there's lots of things to be thinking about. And this is an opportunity in your life.
I could so relate to that, being over 50. And I too had thought about a podcast for like 6 months, and then, kind of sat on it, and a class appeared, as the timing is so profound. And I still do consulting with businesses with my husband. We have a company that does consulting, and I wanted to do a little more again about self-improvement and self-help. And the reactions were interesting. The questions I get is, well, aren't you going to retire? I'm like, that word does not exist in my energy.
Right.
It does not. But there's support, but there's also pushback. It's like, well, I don't really need to do this, but I enjoy it. I enjoy it. And it's a way to give back, and it's a way to keep creative and to reach people who just don't have any other resources. So I love what I do too. The blocks. Can you tell me more about these blocks that you kind of encountered as people see us as, why do you keep working? What's your passion?
Right. Because I don't even like the word retire myself. I mean, I use it sometimes because I know it's a context for people, but it never was a word that I liked. Even as a young kid, when my mom would be talking about retirement, it was never a word that sat well in my body. And so I think you get the comments, you get the pushback. I think it's important to stay engaged in whatever lights you up and stay interested. I try to surround myself with people like that.
Exactly.
And so this is as much as a gift to me when I do it as it is to the world when I'm putting it out there, because it reminds me, other people who are out there trying to find meaning and living a Moxie-filled life.
Yeah, I've run into some listeners. Kind of the people who listen to podcasts are wide range. So I noticed the ones that are like 55 had emailed me and said, well, I don't know if I can do this at quote my age. And I'm like, you're 55, you have a life ahead of you. Do you want to stay kind of in an uneasy feeling? Because a lot of people, when they hit these milestones, they start reviewing their life, age 40, age 50, age 60. And it's a perfect time for them to hear what you have to say, because they are reimagining their lives or just fading out. So this is a perfect topic for my listeners.
And I have to check it in myself too, because some of this stuff runs real deep. These attitudes about age run real deep. And I've caught myself doing it to other people, even if it's just in my own mind. And little boxes we put ourselves in and other people in, and calling that out when it happens and recognizing it. I think that's a big, big, big conversation because our thoughts and our words have power. And so what kind of life do we want to create? And that is, I don't think I have a vision for the type of life I want to lead after 50. Precisely. And so that's what I'm moving toward.
Can you share what your vision is?
Actually, I'm doing it. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm doing it, and I'm having a lot of fun with this podcast. It was a stretch for me on the technology side in the beginning. And that was a stretch in just the people I've met, but I'm doing it, and I like to live on the edge, kind of the what's next. And it feels good. It's empowering for me. It's creative, as you mentioned earlier. So I'm trying to seize the day. I'm trying to seize the moment of the things that I've always thought about doing, or it might be something new that is sparking for me.
What, for the listeners who are in this dilemma, who may not want to be on the edge, what advice can you give them about, Moxie means courage to me. It means, I guess, persistence. And I like that title because of the symbolism there. How can somebody get this Moxie feeling of it's okay to and not be so scared of what everybody else thinks?
And that's a big one too. What is everybody going to say? What people are going to, what are they going to think? And I think it's just challenging yourself. First of all, finding what's going to light you up.
Okay.
And really listening to your intuition about where you want to direct your energy. And then carving out that space for the vision. What do you want your life to look like? Okay. Because if you don't allow for that time, and that may not come quickly, that may be something that takes a little bit of time and just a little bit of introspection. And so allowing for that bubbling up, but following your intuition and then letting go. The worrying about what other people think or might say is perfection stuff.
Good point.
And in my mind, and so perfection and then the roles that we've been assigned. And so kind of deciding, does that work for me anymore? Do those roles work for me anymore? Do I really care about what that person thinks or says if they disagree with me? And if they really fall out of your life because of something that you have done that was true to you, then maybe they don't belong there anyway. That's what I kind of tell myself when I'm feeling those moments of, do I really want to do this? Is somebody not going to like this? And just say, well, if they really have a hard time with it and it interferes with our friendship, our relationship, then it wasn't a very strong relationship to begin with.
That hit home to me, just what you said, because in the last few years, as I continue to work and enjoy my life, I do have a work-life balance, and I've always been that way, even when I first started this business with my husband. But there are some friends, one in particular, that she decided to retire early. And just because I didn't, you can feel the pulling away kind of thing. And, oh, we have nothing in common, and I don't have a schedule, but I do, that kind of thing. So you do shed people out of your life. But like you said, there's something that was there that didn't allow that full connection, that they pulled away that way. And they don't support my efforts on social media or things like that. And it's part of that shedding process and opening yourself up to new people like I have. So I've kind of opened up my energy, and I met you, and I met some other amazing women that are just really rocking it out there. And they're courageous, persistence, everything that Moxie says in your podcast.
Yeah, I call the energy vampires, paying attention to the energy vampires in your life. And you can feel that. I mean, if we really do an inner check, we can feel how, or notice how we feel when we leave some of these conversations. How do I feel? Do I feel energized, or do I feel drained? It's real simple.
I like that. That's great. Those are good ways to check in on yourself. And when you have these dreams of continuing to be creative like you and I have, there are going to be people you shouldn't even share it with, because they're just going to, drain you as a vampire. I categorize vampires into many things, and the ones that I think of are called vampire, who are controllers. They just don't want you to do that.
Yeah, I was very conscious when I launched this in January that when I was putting it out there on some of my social media and things, and I have friends, like most of us do, on social media, that go back to junior high, go back to high school. And I really was concerned what some of them might think. And I just thought that was so interesting. Like this, are we still back to the junior high school? Because I think that's when that really starts to kick in. What are other people going to say? Do I want to fit in? I don't want to stand out. All those little things. I just really noticed that about myself. And it's interesting now, almost 5 months later, a lot of that stuff is just softened. And I realized that was just some tape that probably started back in junior high or high school that was playing, that was still there.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really great point. The stories that we repeat to ourselves are so hypnotic. So we've learned stories from society and our friends. I have friends dating back to grade school still and high school. And it's amazing. They just won't even acknowledge social media presence. That's their thing. They're kind of still stuck in that mentality. But it's real interesting how if we don't filter our thoughts and observe them like you're talking about, we'll start repeating stories to ourselves like, well, maybe I should just call it a day, or I'm done. Or many people who retire, I read recently, are bored. I have a relative who retired, and he has interest in stuff, but he's a very active person. It wasn't enough for him. So he took on a 3-day-a-week job just to give him a little more variety. And my oldest brother, retired recently, but he still teaches at a university. And so, but he has enough time to travel and balance and enjoy the fruits of his effort. But he keeps creative, in that creative mode and mentoring students. And I think, to me, that's a definition of an amazing so-called semi-retirement state, for lack of a better word to call it. But I think people need to reframe it, because you're bringing up stories, and I think that's a really good point. If we reframe that story in our head, that, hey, we're at the point of our life, we can do anything we want.
Yeah.
And change that story to change their life and their focus. So I would say to listeners, listen to what you're telling yourself. Am I too old to make a change? Am I too old to continue this journey? Filter, observe. I always put on that observer mode. Don't critique yourself, just write it down.
And then where's that coming from? When you do kind of find that tape, like, where did that come from? And there's so much ageism around us that comes through. It might even be from your family, but it's probably from society. And, cause there's so much of it that comes through, and just, deciding like, wait a minute here. The other thing I think about is I want to model for my own kids what a vital, happy, inspiring second or third chapter looks like. So I also have that in mind as well.
Yeah, we're role models. I don't have children, but I have great nephews now, and they're watching. You know,
They are.
they're trying to understand what their aunt does. And one of the younger ones said to his friend, "Oh, my aunt writes books," and the kid didn't believe that. So we were at a party, and the kid comes up to me and says, "Did you really write a book?" And I said, "Yes." And it's like they never heard of it because their parents, have a 9 to 5 and kind of a robotic type situation for themselves. So these kids need to know that there's so many possibilities. And my older great nephew now, leaving the nest, is considering, making his own company, not company, but his own business with his best friend. The pushback from that is really interesting versus he talked with me about it because he knows his aunt and uncle didn't stay in that little 9 to 5 box of their lives.
Right.
And I think that helps when we get to the after 50 part. But for those who, were in the job, they felt okay. They, just kind of went through their daily thing and went to work and so forth. What can we say to them about this part of their lives and what they can do with that? Because that's kind of a question I received from some listeners recently. They're like, okay, things are okay, but, they're staying at the job and all they know is, okay, I'm just going to pull the plug one day and sit on the couch.
I think that, when you have worked that 9 to 5 and that's a lot of your identity and that's a lot of your routine, I think before you shift out of that, it's important to start building things into your life before you leave that.
Okay.
So that you have a place to jump to. Because if you just pull the plug, I think that's very jarring to people. And so taking that time once again and deciding, what do I want to do? Maybe I want to go start playing pickleball or tennis or whatever, join a book club. At least build in a few things hobby-wise or routine-wise so that the jump is easier. And then you can kind of adjust from there, even if it's not something you're that excited about, but and I think also staying in somewhat of a schedule in the beginning, not a 9 to 5 schedule, but some kind of routine in the beginning to kind of help you transition out of that is important too.
That's great advice. And it's great to take a pause and ask these questions. And people, when I talk to people, I was creating a vision for their lives. So I think it's a good time to kind of start visualizing and thinking about, like I said, picture, what do you see yourself doing in the next 5 to 10 years? And ask these questions. And I think they just can take a little time doing that, or even just thinking about it as we're talking in this episode. I think that's a good, sounding board for our listeners.
Yeah. And if you're in a relationship, I think having those conversations with your partner, I know my husband and I had, we had conversations about our joint vision together, but also our independent vision as well. Those are important too, depending on if you're both going to make that jump at the same time or however it's going to look. But, trying to be paddling in the same direction in this new transition and just the vision, reviewing your vision from year to year. Is this working? What, maybe we make a little change here and just kind of stirring it up. I mean, I've always found for myself, I need at least once a year to do something new just to kind of stir things up, whether it's something small or big. That just keeps my juices flowing and my energy up. I'm not a person. I love that. Yeah, I don't, a long-term regular routine sort of gets stale for me.
Oh, I love that. Is such a brilliant point. It reminds me of a friend of mine who every year he would change one habit. And he was a very successful screenwriter and producer. And that served as a role model for me for many years. And I do that as well. I think, relighting that fire. A lot of people don't want to burn the candles at both ends, but some people just don't even like the flame of the candle. And I love this advice because it's so true. Some changes stir it up. Small changes are okay, because then people will have the moxie and courage to do that.
And, I think letting go of once again, the perfection of if you're going to start a new hobby, you're going to be a beginner. You're probably not going to be that good at it, like you are in so many other parts of your life that maybe you've been doing for a long time. And so being okay with beginner's mind and being okay with a beginner makes mistakes as they're learning a new language, because we typically in this part of our lives, we are so capable in many other areas that we don't like that. I know I don't sometimes. We're in that newbie position and it feels weird.
Yeah, and what I love about your podcast is you're giving people the ideas and the permission to think about what they want to do with the rest of their lives, or if they're happy, if they want to make adjustments. And it's groundbreaking because people have not talked about it before.
Yeah, I mean that's the goal, and that's the goal. And I have had many people, friends and otherwise, and family members who just have been like, wow, just the fact, like, wow, you started a podcast, wow. And maybe that's not something they want to do, but just the idea of, wow, you stepped out like that, it's inspired them to do other things in their life.
You're a role model for them. And that's always an amazing thing because you'll create this domino effect in your life and people that listen to your podcast and your ideas.
Yeah. And just we're role models for each other, right? I mean, you're doing the same thing. We inspire each other. We support each other. And we're part of this conversation, once again, of reimagining what it means to age and to age well.
Yeah. I mean, just personally, I love where I'm at right now. I mean, when we created our business, we created it with the sense of balance and, took the time to enjoy our lives along the way. A lot of people, I still have this story. You talk about stories like you mentioned before. Still have this story, work hard, retire, and haven't enjoyed themselves along the way. When people ask, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's like, well, I've enjoyed my life along the way. I created a vision of balance. I mean, I take time on a weekly basis here or there, and I call mental health days off, and enjoy doing and exploring new hobbies. Talk about what you said before is like some things I haven't done socially that I do now. I'm really enjoying. It's a different group, but they just don't label me as still working, that kind of reaction. And It's just been fun. It's like I said, I was playing a game called Banco with some new community members, and I started joking with them. It's like, oh, I got a PhD to throw dice. And they all just laughed. It's like, it kind of broke that stereotype, of what's this Dr. Mary doing here? So I'm sharing a lot of my personal because, it helps just put more examples to all these points. And
absolutely.
I really want to encourage people.
Yes.
It's okay to say, I've been happy with my life, but it feels stale. Something needs to change.
And that's a continual process. And to me, that's not just a over 50 thing. That's a continual for all of us. Absolutely. To be, getting outside of our comfort zone, because that's where the good stuff is. When we know that when our what we're comfortable with, and then there's the comfort zone that's just outside that, and kind of living in that space between the two. That's really where the good stuff is. And we find out so much about ourselves too when we step out like that.
You've had guests on your show talking about various aspects of, life after 50. Is there some couple ideas that I may have not touched on yet that kind of stick out in your mind as these awesome suggestions or tips that you've learned from interviewing people on your show?
I think we've touched on a lot of them. I would just say that I think the planning for what you want to do and listening to your intuition and all that is very important. But I think supporting your health, because if you're not feeling well, then it's hard to get motivated about other things. So making sure that you're getting outside, sunshine, fresh air, eating well, all those things, exercising, stretching, keeping our mobility, our range of motion healthy. I think that is an important piece that sometimes we don't talk about when we talk about the stage of life and retirement and such. And so that's something else I would mention.
I like that because what I've learned is about being adaptable and flexible to our needs as we're after 50. My exercise routine is much different than it was when I was 30 and 40. And I do, in addition, I love hiking. This last weekend we went
Me
hiking in
too.
the mountains and stuff like that. But I've joined a yin yoga class because I realized I haven't been stretching enough.
Mm-hmm.
And the stretching is so important to keep ourselves from injuring ourselves. And the meditation that's part of yin yoga is just so recharging. And
Yeah,
it's all ages in that class. But that self-care you're talking about, yeah,
for
yeah,
sure. So taking stock of that, I think, is a real important piece.
okay,
And deciding that because that's part of your vision. How do I want to feel in my body while I'm doing these activities? And
absolutely.
we have to nurture this, this body that we're in and take care of it.
Yeah, and I think some of the stories I've heard from people in our age group is the stories they tell about themselves too. This is sagging, this is going on. They look at so many negative parts of the process, and we're trying to shed a little spotlight on it's okay, be adaptable. People that are resilient are adaptable, flexible. Observe the stories like you talked about before.
Yeah.
Don't judge them. Think
Yeah.
about
And
what you want to do with your life.
right. And accepting that, yeah, your body may look, your wrinkles are a part of getting older and things like that. And so there's a certain level of acceptance that I think has to come with that. And it takes
Yes.
time, just challenging some of that.
So we know what your vision has been, and you've created this podcast space. So where are you going vision wise? Do you have any projects you want to talk about, or classes or anything like that that you may want to share in regard to this or other things?
I'm having fun with the podcast, of course, and just wanting to keep growing that and seeing what happens there. I have had some people ask me about maybe doing some group coaching regarding
Yes.
retirement. And
Yes. Yes.
so I'm looking at that maybe for the fall. Just kind of playing around with that idea and just seeing where that goes, kind of sitting with it right now, actually.
You're in the percolating stage of,
Yes.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a great idea. People need that kind of space.
Yeah, so that's pretty much, and just right now, that's really, I mean, just some time with the family and some of my other interests and some other traveling. That's pretty much, not starting any new big endeavors like I was this, last summer,
Yeah,
this year.
just
But I never say never.
never say never, because you have one coming. I can feel that. I always like to ask people when we're winding down our conversation is what are you grateful for?
Well, of course, I'm grateful for my family, my husband, and my two beautiful kids. I'm grateful for the life I've created. But the first thing that popped in my mind after my family is I'm grateful for who I've become.
Beautiful.
I'm really just, I'm the older woman I always wanted to be.
Yes.
I had this vision and I feel good in my skin. And so I'm just very grateful for that.
That's a beautiful way to end this conversation. The person you've become, and it's such inspiration to hear. And it's possible to do that. So there are a lot of good suggestions we covered today. And I'm hoping this last part of your gratitude is as striking as it felt for me in my heart. So yeah. So keep on trucking. And I am going to put links to your podcast. So everyone remember, Meaning in Moxie Over 50. And you have a website that's active or no that you like to share as well?
I do. It's the same thing, meaning moxieafter50.com.
Okay.
And you can find some more information there.
You're on all the social medias, and I'll have those links in the show notes. Wonderful. Well, this is such an inspiration for a large group, even under 50, as I get those kind of questions from people. A lot of people come to me or like at this age 40 midlife crisis kind of mode. They're happy, but they're not. They don't know where to go for resources. And you and I think, have created that kind of space. So I'm grateful for that and for meeting you.
This has been lovely, Mary. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you for coming today. And I can barely wait to get feedback from the listeners. And any questions, we'll let you know.
Sounds good.
A note to my listeners, this podcast is aimed to provide useful information to you and my listeners. It's published with the understanding that your host, Dr. Mercer, me, is not engaged in rendering professional counseling or therapy. through the contents of this podcast. If you need those services, such as counseling, therapy, or medical advice, please take responsibility for seeking those services of a competent professional. Contact your local psychological association or ask your doctor for referrals. So thank you for listening and your support of these podcasts, and stay tuned for more. Have a wonderful day. Positively